caste, class, and democracy. In taking the side of the Congress as an organization fighting for freedom, the foreigner does not stop to make a distinction between the freedom of a country and the freedom of the people in the country. In not stopping to make this distinction, the foreigner, it must be said, far from understanding the matter, is allowing himself to be misled, if not deceived. For words such as society, nation, and country are just amorphous, if not ambiguous terms. There is no gainsaying that nation, though one word, means many classes. Philosophically, it may be possible to consider a nation as a unit, but sociologically, it cannot be regarded as consisting of many classes, and the freedom of the nation, if it is to be a reality, must vouchsafe the freedom of the different classes comprised in it, particularly those who are treated as the servile classes. So here, of course, in the writings of the essential writings of B.R. Ambedkar, you're going to find a lot of criticisms for the Congress Party, the leaders of the Congress Party, and a lot of it. So what B.R. Ambedkar starts with is that how the Congress Party always fights for freedom, but then there's a difference between fighting for freedom of the country and for the people of the country. There's a big and huge difference between both of these. And when a person does not make a distinction between what fighting for people of the country and fighting for the freedom of country means, then the person is being misled, because he's thinking that the Congress Party, by talking about freedom of the country, is also talking about freedom of the people of the country, according to Ambedkar. Words such as society, nation, country are just amorphous, if not ambiguous. So they are not absolute terms. They do not mean absolute quantities. And when we talk about nation, basically we're talking about so many different classes. So nation, it may be one word, it may mean to signify one thing, but it means many, many classes. Okay, so philosophically speaking, nation is one unit, it's a single thing. But sociologically, from a social perspective, from the perspective of the society, a nation consists of so many different people, different classes. And when we talk about freedom of the nation, then the freedom of the different classes comprised in it, particularly the servile class. That means that when we talk about freedom of the nation, it should also mean freedom for the servile classes. Consequently, it is now, when we talk about the servile classes, when Ambedkar refers to the servile classes, basically the servant class who has been serving the other classes. Okay, so you all know that in our country, India, the servile class has been the lower castes, the fourth class, the Shudras, for a very long time, according to the Hindu religion. Consequently, it is foolish to take solace in the fact that because the Congress is fighting for the freedom of India, it is also fighting for the freedom of people of India and of the lowest of the low. So Ambedkar criticizes the Congress Party for not fighting for everybody and fighting for only certain classes, certain people, and basically he's also targeting them for not even fighting for the people of the country, and not all people though, of course. The question whether the Congress is fighting for freedom has very little importance as compared to the question for whose freedom is the Congress fighting. So whether Congress is doing or fighting or even succeeding in the task or not is not even that important. But what is more important is that whatever Congress is claiming to do, that whoever is fighting, who is it that the Congress is claiming to fight for? This is a pertinent and necessary inquiry, and it would be wrong for any lover of freedom to support the Congress without pursuing the matter and finding out what the truth is. But the foreigner who takes the side of the Congress does not care even to raise such a question. Why is the foreigner so indifferent to so important a question? So far as I am able to judge, the reason for such a difference is to be found in the wrong notions of self-government and democracy which are prevalent in the West and which form the stock in trade of the foreigner who takes interest in Indian politics. So any foreigner who's of course not an Indian. So the freedom of India does not really impact that person. So for that person, whatever Congress is doing is right and just, because the foreigner has wrong notions of what a democracy is and should mean, and the foreigner has wrong notions of self-governance too. It is propounded by the Western writers in politics that all that is necessary for the realization of self-government is the existence among a people of what Grote called constitutional morality. By constitutional morality is meant habits of paramount reverence for the form of the Constitution, enforcing obedience to the authorities acting under and within those forms, yet combined with the habit of open speech, of actions subject only to definite local control and unrestrained censure of those very authorities as to all their public acts, combined, too, with a perfect confidence in the bosom of every citizen, admits the bitterness of party consent that the forms of Constitution will not less sacred in the eyes of his opponents than in his own. So when we talk about constitutional morality, what Grote meant by constitutional morality is that there is a constitution which enforces obedience on the people, which makes sure that people are following it, are being obedient to the constitution, and the authorities, those who have power, those who are given the task of maintaining the country, are also working in accordance to the constitution, acting under the guidance of the constitution, and the people have open speech, the right to speak, right to action, whatever they want, and their action is subject to some legal control. Their actions have been prohibited by some limit, and the legal and the judicial authorities have some power and have imposed some restraints over the actions of the people. And their public acts combined too with a perfect confidence in the bosom of every citizen, amidst the bitterness of party consent and that forms of constitutional, that even that every citizen does accept to it that the constitution will be sacred in everybody's eyes, and the constitution will be treated as a sacred text which has to be followed at every point of time. If in a populace these habits are present, then according to Western writers in politics, self-government can be a reality and nothing further need be considered. Okay. So, according to Western writers who have written on politics, who have written on self-government, government, all of these things, this is just everything. We don't need anything else. So, constitution and constitutional morality being followed is something that is the highest form of achievement that is needed. Similarly, Western writers on democracy believe that what is necessary for the realization of the ideal of democracy, namely the government by the people, of the people, and for the people, is the establishment of universal adult suffrage. Other means have been suggested, such as recall, plebiscite, and short parliaments, and in some countries they have been brought into operation. But in a majority of countries, nothing more than adult suffrages seem to be necessary. So, for people, democracy, for Western writers, most of the Western writers, for a democracy, in a democracy is a major chunk of universal adult suffrage. We can say mixed with some pinches of, let's say, plebiscite and recall and short parliaments and all of that stuff. So basically, democracy will only mean that, okay, if universal adult suffrage is achieved, that means they have reached a milestone in the achievement of democracy, in the following of democracy. But in majority of countries, apart from the adult suffrage, the plebiscite, that is the taking of majority of opinions of people, regular parliamentary sessions, recall, everything, etc., protest and criticism for the right kind of government and actions taken, all of these is absent, and only with the acceptance of the universal adult suffrage they have claimed to be a democracy, which is absolutely not true. I have no hesitation in saying that both these notions are fallacious and grossly misleading. If democracy and self-government have failed everywhere, it is largely due to these wrong notions. Habits of constitutional morality may be essential for the maintenance of a constitutional form of government, but the maintenance of a constitutional form of government is not the same thing as a self-government by the people. So, what Ambedkar is telling us is that the Western writers have this notion that if the constitutional morality is formed, that if the universal adult suffrage has been achieved and has been adopted, then the government is democratic, it is self-government, ruled by the self, and the constitution is followed, etc. But Ambedkar tells us that when the constitutional morality is followed, it is only a constitutional form of government, and it is not the same as self-government by the people. Even if universal adult suffrage is given to people, all people have the right to vote, that does not mean that the people are ruling themselves. There's a huge difference. Similarly, it may be granted that adult suffrage can produce government of the people in the logical sense of the phrase, that is in contrast with the government of a king. So if we compare it with the government of a king, that is with the monarchy, then yes, universal adult suffrage can to some extent form the government of people, by the people. But it cannot by itself be said to bring about a democratic government in the sense of government by the people and for the people. So it can be of the people, that it's not something that is monastic, and that is not something it is hierarchy, in a hierarchical way. So maybe, okay, when universal adult suffrage is accepted, then the government is of the people, but that does not mean that it is also by the people and for the people. These views of Western writers and politics regarding democracy and self-government are erroneous for very many reasons. In the first place, they omit to take into account the incontrovertible fact that in every country there is a governing class grown up by force of historical circumstances which is destined to rule, which does rule, and to whom adult suffrage and constitutional morality are no bar against reaching places of power and authority, and to whom the servile classes, by reason of the fact that they regard the members of the governing classes as their natural leaders, volunteer to elect as leaders. Secondly, so the first thing, so this concept of just accepting the universal adult suffrage and bingo, you have got your democracy, and just adopting the constitutional morality, and bingo, there you go, that you have the self-government and democracy, all of that. This is highly erroneous according to Ambedkar. So Western writers and Western thinkers have said that, okay, this is something that you need to achieve, and there you go, you have your democracy and self-government, but that is not enough. So he points out at some points that what are the mistakes and what are the points that the Western writers are missing, that are needed for, that are essential for a democracy and a self-government. So the first thing is that in the first place they omit to take into account the incontrovertible fact that in every country there is a governing class grown up by force of historical circumstances which is destined to rule. So they forget thinking about that there is a class in every country that has had the historical circumstances, that throughout history they have somewhere being destined to rule, and therefore they have had this we can say kind of a privilege or kind of a push already due to this historical circumstance, and that is why they are the governing class. Okay, and for them, adult suffrage and constitutional morality, that they just not don't mean anything for them, because historically they have been supported to govern, and even now the condition is the same, that one class is dominating everybody else in their governance. Okay, and even the servile classes, they regard this class, this governing class, as their natural leaders, and they have been doing this for centuries now, and they are the ones who should be who deserve to be leaders, so they naturally are leaders. Okay. Secondly, they fail to realize that the existence of a governing class is inconsistent with democracy and self-governance, and that given the fact that where the governing class retains its power to govern, it is wrong to say that democracy and self-government can exist unless democracy and self-governance are regarded as mere matters of form. So they also fail to realize that because this governing class is existing today, this governing class is the same that somehow has been ruling for a very long time. It is in their history, it is in their family, and even though if not in their family, some way or the other, maybe by the means of wealth, maybe then by means of ownership, power, but somewhere or the other they have had an our power in governance. So they do not realize the fact that the governing class is inconsistent with democracy and self-government, and that where the governing class retains power to govern, the democracy and self-government exist unless democracy and self-government are regarded as mere matters of form. So when this governing class, which had already had an upper hand because of historical circumstances, when this governing class comes to power, then somewhere or the other democracy and self-governance just exist as forms, as they don't have any matter within them, they're just forms and they're empty inside. Thirdly, they do not seem to be aware that self-government and democracy become real not when a constitution based on adult suffrage comes into existence, but when the governing class loses its power to capture the power to govern. So, self-government and democracy will only come to power just merely by accepting universal adult suffrage and incorporating it into a constitution and forming a constitution which is followed by everybody. It's not the mere means to achieve democracy and self-government. The real self government and the real democracy is achieved when not only the governing class comes to power, where the real people who do not have any historical privileges, historical circumstances by their side to govern, when they come into power, is the real time when, you know, democracy and self governance is coming alive. Fourthly, they seem to overlook the fact that while in some countries the servile classes may succeed in ousting the government class from the seat of authority with nothing more than adult suffrage, in other countries the governing class may be so well entrenched that the servile class will need another safeguards besides adult suffrage to achieve the same end. So the fourth point that he hints at, or he directs us towards, is that okay, in some countries it may have happened that the servile classes that has been serving the other classes for a long period of time, they may have thrown out the governing class and they may have themselves come into power. They have got the power and they have got the authority to rule. But then in other countries, in the rest of the countries, the governing class is very much dominating the servile classes still, and though the governing class has done so with the help of adult suffrage, maybe the governing class has come into power because of properly following the they have come to power after following all the rules mentioned in the constitution, after the adult suffrage. But still, that is not true democracy and not true self-governance. They may have come into means by real means and by justified means that have already been mentioned, but still that is not self-governance and that is not democracy. And in such a case, when the governing class comes into power, the servile classes need more protection. Adult suffrage won't do anything for them. Lastly, they seem to pay no heed to the fact that given the existence of the governing class, what matters most in the consideration of any scheme of democracy and self-government is the social outlook and social philosophy of the governing class. For so long as the governing class retains its means to capture the power to govern, the freedom and the well-being of the servile classes must depend upon the social outlook, the social conscience of the governing class and its philosophy of life. So also, what is very very important is that okay, maybe the governing class is still in power, but then what matters, what is very important, is what is the social outlook of that governing class, how they want to rule, what is their philosophy, how it is that they want to rule, they want to establish their rule. And the servile classes will be impacted a lot with their outlook, with their political and social outlook. So these are the few points, the few errors that the Western writers on politics and form of government had missed out. The recognition of the existence of a governing class as a fundamental and a crucial fact confronting democracy and self-government is the only safe and realistic approach to those who wish for democracy and self-government to come into their own. It is a fatal blunder to omit to take account of it in coming to a conclusion as to whether in a free country freedom will be the privilege of the governing class only, or it will be possession of all. Okay, so the recognition of the existence of a governing class, that first step will include that we recognize that there is a governing class that is existing, and that class has been in power for a long period of time, and that is the governing class. And a crucial fact confronting democracy and self-government is the only safe and realistic approach. So it is the only approach that we need to understand. We need to first realize that there is a governing class that has been in power. And when we talk about governing class, Ambedkar not only means about a single particular family that has been in power and due to hierarchy they have been given power, but by a governing class it means a certain group of a certain social group of people, a certain socialite, in that sense. Okay, that all those people who have come into power have had some kind of same background, same kind of resources with them. It is a fatal blunder to omit to take account of it in coming to a conclusion as to whether in a free country freedom will be the privilege of governing class only, or it will be the possession of all. In my view, therefore, what the foreigner who chooses to side with the Congress should ask is not whether the Congress is fighting for freedom. He should ask for whose freedom is Congress fighting, because it is very important. The group of people, the class, or for whom the Congress is fighting is a very important question, because that is what will determine the future. who will come into power next, who will have the right, the resources, and the ability, capabilities, and the chances, opportunities, the environment, everything to come into power. That they have the it's absolutely equal chance of coming into power as anybody else. Is it fighting for the freedom of the governing class in India, or is it fighting for the people of India? Freedom of people of India. If he finds that the Congress is fighting for the people of the governing class, he should ask the congressman, is the governing class in India fit to govern? This is the least he can do before siding with the Congress. So if you are siding with the Congress, if you claim that Congress is good, if you claim that it is Congress that is doing everything and is fighting for the freedom, you should ask this question. The foreigner should ask this question. And why he is taking into account the foreigner is because any Indian or anybody who is impacted by that freedom of the country is heavily misled by the Congress because it has been in power for such a long time. What are the answers which congressmen have to give to these questions? I do not know, but I can give what I think are the only true answers to these questions. So, first, he tells this foreigner to ask these questions to the congressman because the foreigner will only have a neutral and a biased information. So, he asks the foreigner to ask these questions and then he himself answers them. To start with is well to know who constitute the governing class of India. The governing class in India consists principally of the Brahmins. Now he's talking about that the governing class for a very long period of time has been made of Brahmins. Present day Brahmins repudiate the allegation that they belong to the governing class, though at one time they described themselves as Bhutevs, God on earth. What can this volte forse be due to? It is due to guilty conscience born out of the realization that they have committed criminal breach of the trust imposed upon the intellectual sections in every uh, community by the sacred law of humanity, not to serve the interest of their own class but to safeguard the interest of all, and therefore dare not stand before the bar of the world. Or is it due to their sense of modesty? It is unnecessary to stop to speculate as to which is the truth. So, in a direct confrontation, what Ambedkar tells us that the first question we need to ask is who is the governing class? And in India, the governing class are the Brahmins. It is the Brahmins. And they have changed themselves, they have changed their claim because earlier they would claim that they're the Bhudevs, that is, they're the gods on earth, but now they claim that they are the governing class. And this difference that they change themselves from God to just mere governors who will govern people, it is because they have realized, it is because of the shame that they have carried, it is because of the guilty conscience of them that they have not let any other class prosper, and they have safeguarded just their own interest and just pushed away and pushed down all the other classes, not let them study, not let them grow, just making them work and work. That the Brahmins are governing class is hardly open to question. There are two tests one could apply. First is the sentiment of the people, and the second is the control of administration. I am sure there cannot be better and more decisive test than these two. As to the first, there cannot be any doubt. Taking the attitude of the people, the person of the Brahmins is sacred. So the first is the sentiment of the people. What do the people think of the Brahmins? So to answer the first question, the person of the Brahmin is sacred. In ancient times, he could not be hanged no matter what offense he committed. So in ancient times, the Brahmins was regarded so sacred that no matter how hard, how guilty the person is, whatever degree of crime has he committed, the Brahmin will not be hanged. As a sacred person, he had immunities and privileges which were denied to the servile class. So, because the Brahmins were sacred, they had some privileges that that were completely denied to the servile classes. He was entitled to first fruits. In Malabar, where the Sambandham marriage prevails, the servile classes such as the Nayars regarded an honor to have their females kept as mistresses by Brahmins. So the situation of the ancient India was so pathetic that the Nayars, that is the lower castes or the servile classes, would be glad even if they had the females of their community were the mistresses of Brahmins. So that was what the Brahmins were considered as. That was how sacred the Brahmins were considered, and he is citing all these examples from ancient India. Even kings invited Brahmins to deflower their queens on prima noctis. There was a time when no person of their servile class could take his food without drinking the water in which the toes of the Brahmins were washed. So of course you will find there are many exaggerations in the text, but then again they point out to some form of the truth. Sir P.C. Ray once described how in his childhood rows of children belonging to the servile classes used to stand for hours. Okay, so Ambedkar is trying to cite all these examples to prove that how the Brahmins consider themselves so sacred, that they had all these privileges, that the people had to wash the feet of Brahmins and then drink that water, that even the people from lower castes were happy if their the females were mistresses of the Brahmins. That is how sacred the Brahmins were considered. Okay, so here's a story, a personal account of P.C. Ray, that how in his childhood he would have to stand in hours, and because he belonged to a servile class, he was not a Brahmin. So if you're interested, you can always, okay, let's read this. Okay, so the traveler Ludovico the Varthema, who came to India in the middle of the 16th century, visited Malabar, says it is proper and at the same time a pleasant thing to know who those Brahmins are. You must know that they are the chief persons of the faith as priestess among us. And when the king takes a wife, he selects the most worthy and the most honored of these Brahmins and makes him sleep the first night with his wife in order that he may deflower her. Do not imagine that the Brahmin goes willingly to perform this operation. The king is obliged to pay him 400 to 500 ducats. The king only had, and no other person in Calicut adopts this practice. Okay, so this is a very much true practice that was followed in ancient India, that the king, when the king would choose his wife, he would first let a Brahmin sleep with her to deflower her, and the Brahmin would not do this by will. The Brahmin would be paid 500 to 400 ducats, that is the currency. So the Brahmin would be paid to sleep with the king's wife, because the king would think that if his future wife sleeps with a Brahmin, that means she would give birth to good and amazing and children who will rule in the future. Other and basically sons will be worthy kings. Other travelers tell that the practice was widespread. Hamilton, in his account of the East India, so this is that many foreigners have accounted for this information, that this has been a practice, a prevalent practice for a long period of time in history, and it was only prevalent among the kings. Not everybody would do that, but only the kings would do this practice, would follow this. When the Samarin marries, he must not cohabit with his bride till the Namburi. The Nambutri or chief priest had enjoy her. So they would. It was like, it's very much similar to like when we prepare a prasad. So before we eating, we offer it to God. A chunk of it we offer it to God, that first you have it and then we'll have it. Okay, so it's kind of that the tradition was called Nambudri or Namburi in English, in their accent. So the Nambudri will enjoy 3 nights of her company, sleep with her, because the first fruits of her new petals must be a holy oblation to the god. She worships instead of the nobles. So the wife of the future, the future wife of the king, sleeping with the Brahmin is like devoting or first offering it to the god, the first fruits of her new petals to the god, as a thank to the god. And the Brahmins are complimentary paid. They are forced to supply the priest places themselves. Buchanan also refers to this. The ladies of the Tamuri family are generally impregnated by Nambudris. If they chose, they may employ the higher ranks of Nayas. It's the same thing. So so many examples they have been here is given, that how the king, before sleeping with his wife, his future wife, he would first let the Brahmin sleep with him. So it will be like offering the first new petals of the wife to God, like we offer food. So that was the practice, and that was the rank that the Brahmins would hold in the country. That is how sacred they were considered. They were considered as gods in the nation. Basically, this is a table to show the percentage and the population. What was the population of Brahmins, population in lakhs, and percentage of population, number of posts held. So it's a very clear thing that the depressed classes, the servile classes, they were 70 lakh in population. They would constitute 14% of it in that, and still they would be gazetted to only 25 posts. So, and they would be appointments held will be 1.5. So you see the contrast, that the population of the Brahmins was so low, but the number of posts that they would hold was so much more as compared to the other three given here. Non-gazetted post over rupees, and so this is just another thing. Even for the non-Brahmins, so the non-Brahmins who did not belong to Brahmins, their number was even more. The backward classes, the servile classes, were 245 lakh in population. Okay, and still they would only get 2.0 percentage of appointments. They would be appointed to only 2.0% post. They would hold only 50 posts while their population was 245 lakh. So Ambedkar is trying to tell us that how clearly this is such a mismatch of the population, the majority, and the people who are holding the position holders, and the population people who have more population. So the Brahmins, so there was so much less in number, they would just assume themselves and have most of the positions to themselves. Where did we leave before this? Yeah, they would used to stand for hours together in the morning on the roadside in Calcutta with cups of water, waiting for a Brahmin to pass ready to wash his feet and take it to their parents, waiting to sip it before taking their food. So such was the condition that P.C. Himself encounters, that children would stand in queues for hours, and a Brahmin would pass by. The Brahmin would wash his feet, and then the children would take that water, the holy water. I'm double quoting it. The water to the parents, and the parents would drink it first, and then only consume any food for the day. And the British government, and by reason of its equalitarian jurisprudence, these rights, immunities, and privileges of the Brahmins have ceased to exist. So under the British government, these rights and this, the holy things and the holy position that the Brahmins were given, they have ended. They have ceased. Nonetheless, the advantages they gave still remain, and the Brahmins are still eminent and sacred in the eyes of the servile class, and still addressed by them as Swami, which means Lord. So even though the privileges, the titles, the positions that the Brahmins held before coming of Britishers have all ended, they're not much in any more positions as they were before. They don't have any more privileges of maybe tax benefits or anything, but still, even after that has ended, the servile classes refer to them as Lord or Swami. The second test gives an equally positive result. To take only the Madras presidency by way of illustration, it shows the distribution of gazetted posts between the Brahmins and other communities in the year 1948, the table that we discussed right now. Similar data from other provinces could be adduced to support this conclusion. It is unnecessary to labor the point whether the Brahmins claim themselves to be members of the governing class or not. The fact that they control the administration, their supremacy is accepted by the servile class. So basically, Ambedkar is telling that it is the fault of the Brahmins as well as the servile classes, that even being more in number, they just serve themselves to the Brahmins. History shows that Brahmins has always had other classes as his allies, to whom he was ready to accord the status of a governing class, provided they were prepared to work with him in subordinate cooperation. So all the other classes who would submit themselves to the Brahmins, who would work under the coordination of the Brahmins, and who would just give themselves to the Brahmins would make them and give them the status. In ancient and medieval times, he made such an alliance with the Kshatriyas. So the Kshatriyas was such a class that submitted themselves to the Brahmins, and the Brahmins then made them rulers. The governing class, they made them the kings. At present, the Brahmins has made an alliance with the Vaishyas, class called Banyas. So in ancient times, they made an alliance with the Kshatriyas, and then they made them kings and queens and all of that. Now the Banyas, the Brahmins have made their collaboration with the Vaishya class, the Banyas. The shifting of this alliance from Kshatriya to Banya is natural. In these days of commerce, money is more important than sword. So, because this is the time of commerce, money, trade, so of course the Brahmins have seen that the opportunity is more in money than in fighting and sword and all of those things. So they shifted from an alliance with Kshatriyas to an alliance with the Banyas, the Vaishyas. That is one reason for this change in party alignment. The second reason is need for money to run the political machine. So because the Brahmins are very much in power, they need money to run the machine, to run the politics of the country, and the money they get is by coming into an alliance with the Banyas. So he's showing that how the Brahmins have been selfish, according to Ambedkar, how Brahmins have been selfish, that they just shifted their alliance, with the people. So whoever the people benefits the Brahmins get together with them, according to Ambedkar. Money can come only from the Banya. It is Banya who is financing the Congress largely because Mr. Gandhi is the Banya, and also because he has realized that money invested in politics gives large dividends. Those who have any doubts in the matter might do as well to read what Mr. Gandhi told Mr. Louis Fisher on 6 June 1942, reports Fisher. So I don't think I need to explain this to it, and you can very much read what Mr. Gandhi has told Louis Fisher, that uh, you know I said I had several questions to ask him. At the Congress Party, very highly placed Britishers are recalled, had told me that the Congress was in the hands of big business and that Gandhi was supported by the Bombay mill owners who gave him as much money as he wanted. What truth is there in these assertions? I asked. So Louis Fisher asked these questions to Gandhi. Unfortunately, they are true. Gandhi said that Congress hasn't had enough money, and the mill owners of Bombay, they would supply Congress Party with as much money as they want because they supported Gandhi. We thought in the beginning to collect 4 annas from each member per year, but it hasn't worked. So, what proportion of the Congress budget is covered by Indians? Practically all of it. So, in this ashram, for instance, we could live as much more poorly than we do and spend less money, but we do not, and the money comes from our rich friends. So, Gandhi has admitted to it, that how the Bombay mill owners, the Banyas, have been financing them. For this reason, it is impossible for the Brahmin to exclude the Banya from the position of a governing class, and that is the reason that because the Banya class provides them with money, that is why the Brahmins have befriended the Banya class. In fact, he has established not merely a working but a cordial alliance with the Banya. The result is that the governing class today is a Brahmin Banya instead of Brahmin Kshatriya, as it used to be. So earlier it used to be the Kshatriya who will be the king, a governing class, and the Brahmins. But now, because the Brahmins, the Congress party, according to Ambedkar, needs money, and that is why they have shaken hands with the Banyas. The existence of the governing class does not cover the whole story. What is significant is that the members of the governing class in India are quite conscious of the fact that they do belong to the governing class and that they alone are destined to rule. So what is more important, what is the more thing that we need to focus on, is that the governing class, just they think of themselves as the only people who should rule the country. The late Mr. Tilak could never forget that he was a Brahmin and belonged to the governing class. The same is reported to be the case of Pandit Jawaharlal Nehru and his sister Mrs. Vijayalakshmi Pandit. So just because they are Brahmins, they presume themselves that yes, they have the right to be the governing class. Nor is Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel free from the feeling that he belongs to the governing class. So Ambedkar directly attacks Tilak, Vallabhbhai Patel, Nehru's sister Vijayalakshmi Pandit, all of those people. And why? Because these people why have these people come into the forefront of freedom fighting? It is only because they think that they are the only people that have to do this. They're destined to fight. Not only are they conscious of the fact that they belong to governing class, but some of them hold that the servile class are contemptible people who must remain servile and who must never aspire to rule. So these people not only think that they are the ones who are capable to rule, but they also believe that the servile classes should not rule at all. Indeed, they have felt no shame and no remorse in giving public expression to such views. So they openly say that the servile class should continue serving the people because that is what they are good at, and it is we who have to run the country, according to Ambedkar. So when in 1918, when non-Brahmins and the backward classes started an agitation for separate representation, Mr. Tilak, in a public meeting held in Cholapur, said he did not understand why the oil pressers, tobacco shopkeepers, washermen, etc., that was his description of the non-Brahmins and the backward classes, would want to go into legislature. So it's a very clear statement. I don't think I need to explain it. In his opinion, their business was to obey laws and not to aspire for power to make laws. So according to Ambedkar, in 1918, when the non-Brahmins wanted to come into power, they wanted a separate representation for themselves in the form of separate electorates. Mr. Tilak openly said that they are the classes that are just meant to follow the laws. They're not the ones to make any new laws, and they should not aspire for the power that they have to make laws. In 1942, Lord Linlithgow invited 52 important Indians representing different sections of the people to discuss what steps could be taken to make the central government more popular with a view to enlist the sympathy and cooperation of all Indians in war effort. So when in 1942 Linlithgow invited 52 people, and those 52 people should hail from all different sections of society. So among those that were invited were members belonging to the scheduled castes. Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel could not bear the idea that the viceroy should have invited such a crowd of mean men. So soon after the event, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel made a speech in Ahmedabad and said, so Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel was not at all happy that the Lord and the viceroy invited the people from the scheduled castes too. So he said in a speech, the viceroy sent for the letters of the Hindu Mahasabha, he sent to the leaders of Muslim League, and he sent for ganchis, that is oil presses and mochis and the rest. So according to Ambedkar, Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel was not at all happy with the viceroy's decision to invite all these people. Although Mr. Vallabhbhai Patel in his malicious and stinging words refer only to ganchis and mochis, his speech is indicative of the general contempt in which the governing class and the members of the Congress High Command hold the servile classes of this country. Further illustrations of this attitude of the governing class in the Congress High Command can be found from incidents that have taken place in the election campaigns. They are so relevant and so revealing that the special mention be made to them. So, of course, you must have realized this, and we don't need anything to realize that Mr. Ambedkar is very, very openly attacking Congress in a very direct manner. He's not at all concealing his thoughts, metaphorizing them anyway. Ever since 1919, when Mr. Gandhi captured the Congress, congressmen have looked upon the boycott of the legislature as one of the sanctions for making the British government concede the demand for Swaraj. Under this policy, every time there was an election which the Congress decided not to take part, the Congress would not only refuse to put candidates on the Congress ticket but would carry on propaganda against any Hindu proposing to stand for election as an independent candidate. One need not quarrel over the merits of such a policy, but what were the means adopted by the Congress to prevent Hindus standing on an independent ticket? The means adopted were to make the legislature objects of contempt. Accordingly, the Congress in various provinces started processions carrying placards saying who will go to the legislatures, only barbers, cobblers, potters and sweepers. So in 1919, when Gandhi started boycotting, when he started with this regime of boycotting everything that was British, and he called for boycotting the legislative elections too. So what the Congress would do is they themselves would not be contesting in the elections, and any other Hindu who would contest for elections, the Congress would boycott them. And the Congress would say that only the cobblers and the potters and the sweepers would go to legislatures, nobody else. So basically, that the Congress would say that nobody has to go to the legislature, and the people who are going as an independent candidate are not worthy of it. Accordingly, the Congress in various provinces started processions carrying placards saying who will go to legislatures, barbers, combers. When congressmen found that this was not enough to deter persons from standing for the elections, they decided to adopt sterner measures. The first, they started with this agitation when they saw that the people and when the servile class and when the people still went in for the legislation purposes, the Congress adopted sterner measures, believing that respectable people would not be prepared to stand for election if they felt certain that they would have to sit with barbers, potters, and sweepers. The Congress actually went to the extent of putting up candidates from these despised communities on the Congress ticket and got them elected. So, the Congress adopted even sterner measures because they thought that okay, no Hinduite or no Brahmin would go for elections. So that is why they got these people, people from servile classes, to actually stand up in elections and got them elected so that they wouldn't have to sit with them in the legislation. A few illustrations of this outrageous conduct of the Congress may be mentioned. In the 1920 election, the Congress elected a cobbler to the Central Province's legislature. In the 1930 election, they elected to the Central Province's two cobblers, one milkman and one barber, and in the Punjab, one sweeper. In 1934, they elected a potter. It might be said that this is old history. Let me correct such an impression by referring to what happened in 1943 in the municipal elections in Andheri, a suburb of Bombay. The Congress put up a barber to bring the municipality in contempt. What an enormity! The Sinn Féin in Ireland boycotted the British Parliament, but they did not make such hideous use of their own countrymen like the Congress did, according to Ambedkar. The campaign of boycott of the legislature, which took place in 1930, is so of particular interest. The elections to the provincial legislatures in 1930, in which these instances occurred, coincided with Mr. Gandhi's Salt Satyagraha. I hope that the official historian Dr. Pattabi Sittamaiah has failed to do so. Historian of Congress, while recording how Mr. Gandhi decided to serve a notice on the Viceroy Lord Irwin, presenting him with a list of demands to be conceded before a certain date, and on failure by the Viceroy in his behalf, how Mr. Gandhi decided to launch a campaign of civil disobedience, how Mr. Gandhi elected an Englishman to carry his notice, how Mr. Gandhi selected the Salt Act as a target for attack, how he selected Dandi as a scene of battle, how he decided to put himself at the head of the campaign. He marched out of his ashram in Ahmedabad with all pomp and ceremony. How the women of Ahmedabad came out with earthy and a bright tilak to his forehead, wishing him victory. How Mr. Gandhi assured them by saying that Gujarat alone will win Swaraj for India. How Mr. Gandhi proclaimed his determination by saying that he will not return to Ahmedabad until he has won Swaraj. He will not fail to record that while on the one hand the congressmen were engaged in fighting for Swaraj, which they said they wanted to win in the name for the masses, and on the other hand, and in the very year they were committing the worst outrages upon the very masses by exhibiting them publicly as objects of contempt to be shunned and avoided. So the Congress got them purposefully elected. They would purposefully make the people from the servile classes, the backward classes, sit in a position, let them win the election so that later on they could be shunned, and later on they could be very much humiliated that how those people are going against their own country. So Ambedkar targets the Congress party for using the people of the servile classes for their own hideous tasks to show people that how you will be treated if you try to take part into the legislations when we are trying to boycott it. And they practically did that by putting those people from the servile classes as puppets. Such is the mentality of the governing classes in India towards the servile classes. What is to be the fate of the servile class of India under this governing class? The Congress promises to do wonders for the servile class. The Congress speaks of masses. It ought really to speak of them as the servile classes held in bondage by the governing classes when Swaraj comes. It says that it would like to make revolutionary changes, but it has no power to make them, and it must wait for Swaraj. It is this glib talk which goes to deceive the gullible foreigner. So the Congress, according to Ambedkar, they just keep on saying that we will provide for the servile class, we will do for them, we will make them come into power, we will bring revolutionary changes when Swaraj comes, when we are in power, we will do this, we will do that. So according to Ambedkar, all of these talks of the Congress are just glib talk, they are empty, and the people and the foreigner is gullible. The former believes the Congress meant just like anything. Leaving aside the boast and the bluster which lie behind the statement, one may ask what really can happen in India if India does become a sovereign and an independent state. One thing is certain. The governing class will not disappear by the magic wand of Swaraj. So one thing is certain according to Ambedkar, that even if Swaraj comes, even if the British is god of the country, still the governing class would be there, and they would keep on governing the people, and the servile class will be back to the backwards of the society. It will remain as it is, and having been freed from the incubus of British imperialism, will acquire greater strength and vigor. It will capture power as the governing classes in every country do. So what the Congress would do is that even after Swaraj, it will just capture power, it will just come into power, do whatever they wish to do, and they will completely forget about all the classes, all the servile classes, and they themselves, the governing class, will keep resuming power, and they will keep on coming in power. In short, Swaraj will not be government by the people, but it will be government run by the governing class only, not by the people, not for the people, but only run by the governing class. And when it is not by the people, it cannot be for the people. What will the governing class do when India becomes a sovereign independent state? Some hope that they will undertake reform of Tennessee laws, enlarge factory legislation, extend primary education, introduce prohibition and train people to ply charkha, construct roads and canals, improve currency, regulate weights and measures, open dispensaries, and undertake other measures to ameliorate the condition of the servile classes. No one from the servile class can be very enthusiastic about such a program. In the first place, there is nothing very great in it. In the world of today, the governing class can omit to undertake the reforms which are necessary to maintain society in a civilized state. Personally, I have grave doubts about the governing class in India coming forward to carry out even such a modest program of social amelioration. So one may ask, or the governing class claim that when they come to power, what are they going to do? So, of course, here Ambedkar lists a certain list of things that the governing classes have claimed that they will do when they come to power, but then none of that can be true. No governing class can go about following such a modest social reformation amelioration program. Most people forget that what leads the Congress today to mount such a program is a desire to show that the Congress is better than the British bureaucracy. So according to Ambedkar, Congress is just saying all of these things. This is just glib talk, empty talk. It is completely empty from the inside, and these talks have no seriousness and no possibility of commitment. The Congress is just saying these things. These are just blank and glib words and promises to show that they are better than the British bureaucracy and the British government, and that is why they need to move the Britishers out of the country. But once the bureaucracy is liquidated, will there be the same incentive to better the lot of masses? So once the Britishers go, still will the Congress be so much inspired and so much incentivized to bring about all these changes? Still will they follow up their promises? Because right now they're saying these things with full passion because they want to remove the Britishers out of the country. Once the threat is gone, still will they follow up with the promises that they're making right now? I entertain very grave doubts on the point. Apart from this, is social amelioration the be all and end all of Swaraj? Speaking for the servile classes, I have no doubt that what they expect to happen in a sovereign and free India is a complete destruction of Brahmanism as a philosophy of life and a social order. If I may say so, the servile classes do not care for social amelioration. They want poverty, which has been their lot, is nothing to them as compared to the insult and indignity which they have to bear as a result of the vicious social order. So the servile classes don't only need this social reformation, not just money and bread and all everything, but they also want honor, they want respect, they want equality. The question is, will the governing class in India, having captured the machinery of the state, undertake a program for the reform of the social order as distinguished from program of social amelioration? So the Congress is claiming that they will bring about the social amelioration, social reformation, the end of poverty. So economically, they are claiming that they will better the position of the servile classes. But what about dignitatively? What about politically, socially? Will the servile classes also get the respect that they deserve, the honor that they have been denied for such a long time? Because Congress does not talk about that. The statement by congressmen that Congress can do wonders if only India was a sovereign and independent state, supposing that it is in an honest aspiration and not to mere propaganda, proceeds on the assumption that for a man to do what he wants, nothing more is necessary than power. Such a belief is not only pitiable but is really a dangerous illusion. Those who are inclined to cherish such an illusion forget that there are serious limitations on sovereignty, no matter how absolute it is. Then has described these limitations in more telling language than Dicey. In his Law of the Constitution, he says, so all of this other Congress is claiming to do once India becomes sovereign, once India becomes free, it's just mere propaganda to come into power. And these are not actual things that the Congress would do. Such a belief is not only pitiable but is also really a dangerous illusion. Those who are inclined to cherish as an illusion forget that there are serious limitations to sovereignty. So, no matter how absolute sovereignty is, there are limitations to it. Not a man can do everything he wants in power. the actual exercise of authority by any sovereign whatever, and notably by parliament, is bounded or controlled by two limitations. One is external, other is internal limitations. So there are two limitations to power. Even a sovereign does not have absolute power. The external limit is the real power of a sovereign consists in the possibility of certainty that his subjects, or a large number of them, will disobey or resist his laws. So the external threat to the sovereign is that many people will not follow the orders and the rules and regulations laid by the sovereign. They will disobey it. The limitation exists even under the most despotic monarchy. So even if the monarchy is very despotic, very cruel, very tyrannical, even then the external limit exists that the people will stop disobeying that. A Roman emperor or a French king during the middle of the 18th century, in strictness a sovereign in the legal sense of that term, he had absolute legislative authority. So, like the Russian Tsar as the present day, or the French king during the 18th century, also like Louis XVI, everything, they had absolute authority and absolute power. But still, the people, you know, went on and started disobeying him. Any law made by him was binding, and there was no power in the Empire Kingdom which could annul such law. But it would be an error to suppose that the most absolute ruler who ever existed in reality make or change every law at his pleasure. So, you know, accordingly, the Russian Emperor or the French king had absolute power, had everything, but still, no one could make or change every law he wanted. There will be still certain limitations that the sovereign has to follow, and if they do so, then of course the people will simply start disobeying them, as happened in the case of the French king or the Russian Tsar. The authority, that is to say, even of a despot, depends upon the readiness of his subjects, or of some portion of his subjects, to obey his behest, and his readiness to obey must always be really limited. So I hope, and I am presuming that all of you know what happened to the Russian Tsar, how they had to flee, how they were being threatened, they were killed by the people of their own country. This is shown by the most notorious facts of history. None of the early Caesars could, at their pleasures, have subverted the worship of fundamental institutions of the Roman world. The Sultan could not abolish Mohammedanism. So, no ruler can absolutely change every law according to their own pleasure. That is not possible. They will have to follow certain things. Louis XIV, at the height of his power, could revoke the Edict of Nantes, but he would have found it impossible to establish the supremacy of Protestantism, and for the same reason which prevented James II from establishing the supremacy of Roman Catholicism. What is true of the power of a despot, or of the authority of Constituent Assembly, especially true of sovereignty of Parliament. So, be it a despotic ruler, be it the sovereignty of the Parliament, no ruler can change every single law as they wish to according to themselves. There are many limitations to how will they change the law. It is limited on every side by the possibility of popular resistance. It is limited, their power is limited because there is popular resistance. A majority of people will resist to the changes that they will make, and when the majority come together, then of course the king is just a single person. Parliament might legally establish an episcopal church in Scotland, breach of law, change the succession to the throne, or abolish the monarchy, but everyone knows that in present state of the world, the British Parliament will do none of these things. So the British Parliament can do all of these things, but if everybody knows that it will not do so, because if it does so, it will no longer be in power. In each case, widespread resistance would result from legislation which, though legally valid, is in the exercise of sovereignty arise from the nature of legally valid is in fact beyond the stretch of parliamentary power. So all of these things are legally valid. Legally they can do so, but they also know that they will be walking on a very thin line and it is impossible. So they may be they may be doing so in legal terms, but then it is impossible to do something like that because they will be just quickly thrown out of power. The internal limit to the exercise of sovereignty arises from the nature of the sovereign power itself. The external limit is the people who will not and stop following the sovereign. The internal limit is the power of the sovereign itself. Even a despot exercises power according to this character, which is itself molded by circumstances under which he lives. So even the ruler, he will also make changes to the law according to his own character, and his character has been molded by the circumstances, by the situation that he has grown up in. So of course the ruler or the sovereign himself, his character will be and his laws will be in accordance to the country that he or she is governing, and that is why there is a limit to the sovereign itself, and that the sovereign himself is a limit to itself. For example, The Sultan could not if he would change the religion of the Mohammedan world, but if he could do so, it is in the very highest degree improbable that the head of Mohammedanism should wish to overthrow the religion of Muhammad. So, of course, the Sultan of Mohammedanism, first of all, could not change Mohammedanism because of external limit, because the people will not obey it because they would highly regard it as a religion. But the Sultan himself will not make such a change. He himself will not throw out Mohammedanism because he himself is a Mohammedan. He has grown up in that circumstance, and he will always keep that religion to himself and allow the people to follow the religion. The internal check on the exercise of Sultan's power is at least as strong as external limitation. So the internal and external limitation both are equal, because the internal limitation is also comes with the character of the sovereign. People sometimes ask the ideal question why the Pope does not introduce this or that reform. The true answer is that a revolutionary is not the kind of a man who becomes a Pope. So people always ask that if the Pope has such power and influence, why does he not come up with this reform and that reform? So this, Ambedkar answers that a Pope is not a revolutionarist, and a revolutionarist cannot be a Pope. None can gainsay the truth of what Dicey has said. What the governing class may do depends not so much upon the degree of sovereignty as upon what Dicey calls external and internal limitations in sovereignty. Of these two, it is the failure to do good arise out of external limitations. Nobody sees the blame of governing class. The fear of external limitations blocking progress need cause much apprehension. So what Ambedkar is trying to tell us is that we always say and we always pin it on the external limitation, that it is because of the people that but actually it is the internal limitations too, and the fear of internal limitations is even more. They have a greater force. The internal limitations have a much more say and a much more influence than the external limitation. What are the factors that determine these internal limitations? The internal limitations are born out of the outlook, traditions, vested interests, and the social philosophy of the governing class. The purpose of this discussion is to warn the foreigner that before believing what the Congress proposes to do for the servile class, he should make it a point to ask what is the outlook of the governing class, what are the traditions, what is the social philosophy, because the internal limitations are much powerful, more powerful than the external limitations. And the stoppage that the internal limitations, the resistance that the internal limitation, that is the sovereign himself will create, is much more greater than the external limitation. To take the Brahmins first, historically they should have been the most inveterate enemy of the servile classes, who together constitute about 80% of the Hindu population. So the Shudras and the untouchables they cost about 80% of the Hindu population, and they should be just arch enemies of the Brahmins. If the common man belonging to the servile class in India is today so fallen, so degraded, so devoid of hope and ambition, this is entirely due to Brahmins and their philosophy. So we see, so he's given an example that how internal limitations are much more powerful than external limitation, because external limitation will come from the Shudras and untouchables, who are 80% of the population, but still the Brahmins have ruled over them because the internal limitations are much more powerful. And the Brahmins and their philosophy is much different. The cardinal principles of this philosophy of Brahmanism are 5. Created inequality between different classes. So, what are the principles of Brahmanism that the Brahmins work on? First is that there should be inequality between classes, and that inequality should be gradable. So, it should be very significant inequality. Complete disarmament of Shudras and untouchables. Shudras and untouchables should not have any kind of power. Complete prohibition of education for them. They should have no kind of education. They should have no power, no authority, and they should have no property, and just complete suppression of women. All of these are the 5-6 principles of Brahmins. Inequality is the official doctrine of Brahmanism, that they just have to have inequality, and the suppression of the lower classes aspiring to equality has been looked by them and carried on without remorse as their bounden duty, that the Brahmins have without any guilt just ruthlessly follow this policy, that they have to suppress the lower caste. There are countries where education did not spread beyond a few, but India is the only country where the intellectual class, namely the Brahmins, not only made education their monopoly, but declared acquisition of education by the lower classes a crime punishable by cutting off the tongue or by the pouring of molten lead in the ear of the offender. So what the Brahmins have done this is that they have not only acquired monopoly over education, that they are the only ones who are entitled to education, they are the only ones who get the education. But if a Shudra, an untouchable, a person of the lower caste try to do it, they would just cut off their tongue, or they would pour molten lead, pighlawa metal, into their ears so they do not get educated. The Congress politicians complain that the British are ruling India by a wholesale disarmament of people of India, but they forget that the disarmament of Shudras and untouchables was the rule of law promulgated by the Brahmins. The Congress says that Britishers जो है वो इंडिया को disarm कर रहे हैं. They are taking away every power, every authority that they may have, every weapon, and those weapons not only mean physical weapons but the authoritative weapon, the power, political power. So the Congress forget that the Brahmins have done the same thing. This was their core, the cardinal principle that they would follow, that Shudras and untouchables have to be disarmed in every way. Indeed, so strongly did the Brahmins believe that in the disarmament of the Shudras and the untouchables, that when they revised the law to enable Brahmins to arm themselves for the protection of their own privileges, they maintained the ban on the Shudras and untouchables as it was, without lessening its rigor. So what Brahmins forgot was that when they started arming themselves for their protection from the British, still they continued with the ban on disarmament of the Shudras and untouchables. And the Shudras and untouchables still cannot have any arms and ammunition and weapon with them. And that is one of the reasons why the Britishers took over us, according to Ambedkar, because the larger population, 80% of the population, were Sudras and untouchables, and they were only disarmed by the Brahmins, and that is why the Britishers took over us. There is no social evil and no social wrong to which the Brahmin does not give his support. The Brahmin gives support to every wrong, every evil. Man's inhumanity to man, such as a feeling of caste, untouchability, unapproachability, and unseizability, is a religion to him. Everything, unapproachability to man, unseizability, untouchability, everything is a religion to Brahmins. It would, however, be a mistake to suppose that the only wrongs of man are religious to him, for the Brahmins has given the support to the worst wrongs that women have suffered. So for women and for the lower caste, both of these groups, Brahmins have done nothing. They have just promoted social evil and wrong for them. Widows were burnt alive as satis. Brahmins gave his fullest support to sati as burning alive of widow. Widows were burnt alive on the pyres of their dead husbands. Widows were not allowed to remarry. The Brahmins have healthy doctrine. Girls were required to be married before 8, and the husband had the right to consummate the marriage even before the girl had reached puberty. So even if before the girl had her first period, the husband had to consummate the marriage. The Brahmin gave the doctrine his strongest support. So the women were exploited, the Shudras, the untouchable, the lower caste, everybody was, all of these lower castes and women were exploited to the full extent by the Brahmins. The record of the Brahmins as lawgivers for the Shudras, with the untouchables and for women, is the blackest as compared with the record of intellectual castes. For no intellectual caste is prostituted his intelligence to invent a philosophy and to keep his uneducated countrymen in a perpetual state of ignorance and poverty, as the Brahmins have done in India. So nowhere around the world have the intellectual class done this much, and they have been so bad as the Brahmins, because the Brahmins have ensured they were the intellectual class, and the others who were not would remain so for centuries. Even Brahmin today believes in his philosophy of Brahmanism propounded by his forefather. He is an alien element in the Hindu society. The Brahmin vis-a-vis Shudras and the untouchable is the foreign as German to the French, as the Jews to the Gentile, as the white to the Negro. There is a real gulf between him and the lower classes of Shudras and untouchables. He is not only an alien to them, but he is also hostile to them. In relationship with them, there is no room for conscience and there is no call for justice. So the Brahmin to Shudra today, though they are living in the same country, they are as alien to them as German to British. The Banya is the worst parasitic class known to history. In him, the vice of making money is unredeemed by culture or conscience. So they have no conscience, they have no culture, they are the worst class of the country. He is like an undertaker who prospers when there is an epidemic. So जब लोग मर रहे होते, that is when the Banya prospers. Okay, the only difference between an undertaker and the Banya is that the undertaker does not create an epidemic, while the Banya does. So the Banya themselves create the epidemic and then they enjoys it to the fullest potential. He does not use this money for production. He uses it to create poverty and more poverty by lending money for unproductive purposes. So the Banya gets the money and he does not use it for useful purposes, but he uses it to create more poverty. He just keeps the money to himself, does not use it for productive purposes, does not give it to the people, and just keeps it for himself, creating more and more poverty. He lives on interest, and he is told by his religion that money leading is the occupation prescribed to him by Manu. He looks upon it as both right and righteous. With the help and assistance of the Brahmin judge who is ready to decree his truth, he is able to carry his trade. So the judge also helps them, the judiciary, the politics, everything helps the Baniya, because the judge is Brahmin, and the Brahmin Baniya is the governing class. Interest on interest. So the Baniya would give out money, and they would keep on increasing the interest to such heights and such levels, and they would keep leeching out the money like anything. With no conscience, there is no fraud and no chicanery that he will not commit. His grip over the nation is complete. The whole of poor, starving, illiterate is mortgaged to the Baniya. To sum up, the Brahmin enslaves the mind and the Baniya enslaves the body. So Brahmin enslave the mind because they do not allow the Shudra and untouchables and the women to study, no intellectual property for them, and the Baniya takes their over their body, taking away their property and money and everything, all of the resources. Between them, they divide the spoils which belong to the governing class. So between them, they divided who's going to spoil which part of their life. Can anyone who realize what the outlook, the tradition, and social philosophy of the governing class in India is believe that under Congress regime, a sovereign and independent India will be different from India we have today?